The pet rock begins its life on the beaches of
The multicolor mood ring reveals your subconscious feelings in a myriad of breathtaking color.
Do you remember the funniest things from the 1990s? The ones we loved so much, we never imagined they'd be banned? These toys, fads, and everyday habits once filled schools, living rooms, and backyards with laughter, shaping how we grew up. But looking back now, how did something so normal end up disappearing completely? Sky dancers were supposed to be magical little fairies that soared into the air with a graceful spin. What they actually were was a missile disguised in glittery plastic wings. You pulled the string on the base, the doll launched skyward, and for one glorious second it really did look like something out of a cartoon. Then, reality hit, literally. Sky dancers did not glide gently. They shot off like bottle rockets, smacking into ceilings, televisions, or the nearest unlucky sibling. Parents quickly realized that the graceful flight shown in commercials was more like projectile chaos at home. There were kids who ended up with black eyes, bruises, and even a few stitches thanks to one of these fairy launch attacks. Furniture did not fare much better. Lamps, picture frames, and fragile knickknacks became fair game for airborne collisions. But for kids in the 1990s, the risk was part of the fun. You would laugh hysterically when your friend's sky dancer crashed into their dad's head, then nervously launch your own while ducking for cover. It was one of those toys where the unpredictability was the whole point. Even though recalls eventually grounded them for good, sky dancers live on in memory as the prettiest little hazard a kid could ever own. The Super Soaker CPS 2000 was the holy grail of backyard warfare in the 1990s. Forget little squirt guns. This thing was a pressurized beast that fired water streams so powerful they could knock a kid off their feet. It looked more like military equipment than a toy, with a giant reservoir tank and a pump that built insane pressure. The first time you fired it, you understood why playground legends claimed it could break windows. Some parents even complained the spray stung skin at close range, like getting hit with a miniature fire hose. Kids, of course, loved that about it. The CPS 2000 gave you instant dominance in any water fight. You could soak friends across the yard, drench bullies from a safe distance, or unleash chaos at the pool. The only downside was its weight. Lugging the tank around felt like carrying a small backpack full of water. But that did not matter. Owning one meant you were top dog of summer battles. Eventually, concerns about safety led to changes in design, and the CPS 2000 was quietly retired. Still, anyone who ever wielded one remembers the sheer power of being a pint-sized firefighter in their own backyard. Slap bracelets looked innocent enough, just colorful fabric bands covered in neon designs, waiting to curl around your wrist. You straightened the metal strip inside, gave it a smack against your arm, and snap! It coiled tightly in place with a satisfying smack. On the playground, it was like a fashion statement and a game rolled into one. Kids collected dozens in wild patterns, zebra stripes, holographic sparkles, cartoon prints, and traded them like baseball cards. But underneath that thin fabric was a sharp metal spring just waiting to cause trouble. As the covers wore down, the metal started poking through, cutting wrists and scratching skin in ways nobody expected from a fun accessory. Teachers quickly banned them from classrooms, partly because of the injuries and partly because kids spent more time slapping bracelets than paying attention. Parents called them dangerous. Kids just called them awesome. The sting of a well-placed slap was part of the appeal. It was jewelry with an attitude. Even though they were pulled off shelves, slap bracelets remain one of the most iconic 1990s fads. Looking back, they were equal parts stylish and hazardous, which pretty much sums up the decade itself. Moon shoes promised to turn every kid into an astronaut by letting them bounce like they were walking on the moon. In reality, they were plastic platforms with bungee cords stretched across, strapped onto your sneakers with Velcro. You wobbled onto them, took a few awkward hops, and immediately realized you were in trouble. The commercials showed kids bouncing gracefully across lawns. In real life, most kids looked like newborn giraffes trying to stand for the first time. Twisted ankles, scraped knees, and faceplants were practically guaranteed within the first 5 minutes of play. But that did not stop the excitement of trying them out. Kids loved the idea of having their own personal trampolines on their feet, even if it meant constant wipeouts. Parents hated them for both the danger and the noise. Every hop sent a thunderous clunk through the house if you dared use them indoors. Despite the injuries, moon shoes became a must-try fad, a weird combination of futuristic promise and guaranteed pain. They may not have launched anyone into space, but they certainly launched a lot of kids straight into the grass. Yo-yo water balls were the definition of a playground craze that went too far. They were squishy, liquid-filled balls attached to stretchy cords that you swung around like a yo-yo. At first, they felt amazing. Cold, squishy, bouncy, and endlessly fidget-worthy. Kids smacked them against the ground, walls, or their own hands, laughing at the splat-like bounce. But the longer they stuck around, the more obvious the hazards became. The stretchy cords were long enough to wrap around kids' necks, raising serious strangulation concerns that had parents panicking. On top of that, the liquid inside was rumored to be some kind of questionable chemical, and if the ball burst, the mystery slime oozed everywhere. Teachers banned them from schools almost instantly, and many were pulled from toy aisles after safety warnings spread. Still, for a brief shining moment, yo-yo water balls were the coolest thing to dangle from your backpack. They were weird, they were risky, and they perfectly captured the chaotic energy of 1990s playground toys. Creepy crawlers. Thingmaker ovens were both brilliant and absurd. Kids were given little metal molds, bottles of goo called Plastigoop, and a miniature oven powered by a real hot plate. You squirted the goop into the mold, slid it into the oven, and waited while it baked into rubbery bugs, worms, and other gross creatures. The smell alone was unforgettable, a sharp, plasticky odor that filled the kitchen and made parents shake their heads. Every kid who owned one ended up with at least one burn mark as a badge of honor, and yet the danger only added to the thrill, because it felt like you were doing something you were not supposed to. The results were oddly satisfying. Colorful little critters you could collect, trade, or use to scare your sister. But the process? Pure chaos. The ovens got dangerously hot, the fumes smelled like burning plastic, and more than a few kids burned their fingers trying to peek too soon. Parents called it unsafe, but kids loved the mix of science experiment and gross-out factor. The toys had a way of making you feel like a mad scientist, cooking up monsters in your own lab. Despite the danger, creepy crawlers became a cult classic, a perfect example of the 1990s approach to toys. If it looked fun, a little fire hazard was no big deal. Buzz Lightyear with pop-out wings seemed like the perfect movie tie-in toy. Straight out of Toy Story, this action figure came with spring-loaded wings that shot out at the push of a button. Kids everywhere strapped him onto their belts or launched him into mid-air battles. The wings were powerful enough to snap open with a thwack that startled anyone nearby. Friends learned to keep their distance when someone pressed the button, because you never knew where the plastic tips would fly. Getting hit hurt. But somehow it also made the toy feel more real. But those wings? Less to infinity and beyond, and more straight into someone's eye. The sharp plastic tips snapped open with enough force to leave scratches, bruises, and a few trips to the emergency room. Parents were horrified. Kids thought it made him cooler. You never forgot the first time a Buzz Lightyear wing smacked you across the face. Painful, but unforgettable. Eventually, redesigned versions softened the danger, but the original became infamous for turning playtime into a contact sport. For all his heroic charm, Buzz Lightyear ended up being one of the funniest banned hazards of the 1990s toy shelf. Easy Bake Ovens in their 1990s version continued the tradition of tiny kids' ovens powered by little light bulbs. On paper, it sounded safe. Just a light bulb, right? But anyone who ever owned one knows those ovens got hot enough to burn skin in seconds. There were countless stories of kids yelping as they tried to slide their hand in too quickly, only to realize the oven door was basically a heat trap. Even the treats inside could be dangerous, with molten fudge or cake batter sticking to fingers like glue. Parents hovered nearby, torn between pride in their kids' independence and worry about the next burn. Sliding your hand in to grab a cake or cookie often meant singed fingers or worse. There were even cases where kids' fingers got stuck inside, leaving them trapped against the hot interior until parents rescued them. Despite the risks, the thrill of baking your own cupcake was irresistible. Kids proudly served undercooked brownies or overcooked cookies to their families, smiling through the burns. Easy bake ovens were equal parts culinary magic and household hazard. They might have caused pain, but they also created some of the funniest and most nostalgic kitchen disasters of the decade. The Snack Attack board game looked innocent, just a silly game where you launched fake plastic food pieces into a rotating mouth. Kids lined up pizza slices, cookies, and chips, flinging them across the board while laughing at the chaos. The goal was to feed the mouth, but most of the time the food went flying everywhere else. It was impossible to play without someone crawling under the couch or digging behind furniture to retrieve missing snacks. More than once, a dog or toddler snatched up a plastic cookie and tried to chew it like the real thing. The chaos of it all made the game even funnier, even if parents were less amused. That was where the danger came in. Those plastic snacks were just the right size to become choking hazards, and plenty of parents found kids chewing on them instead of playing the game. Still, it was hilarious fun. The game was loud, messy, and filled with laughter as pieces ricocheted off walls and disappeared under couches. Like many 1990s toys, it was banned not because kids disliked it, but because they liked it too much, and a few too many trips to the ER followed. Nickelodeon Gak was slime with attitude. It came in neon colors, stretched like taffy, and made fart noises when you squished it into its plastic tub. Commercials made it look like the ultimate toy. You could stretch it, bounce it, or prank your friends with its gross sound effects. The biggest appeal was the noise. Kids discovered endless ways to make Gak produce disgusting squelches that drove adults crazy. The second appeal was the mess, since it stuck to hair, rugs, and clothes with stubborn determination. If Gak got ground into carpet, you might as well say goodbye to that patch forever. But in practice, it was a disaster. Gak stained clothes, carpets, and furniture permanently, and the chemical smell it gave off was enough to make some parents gag. Kids, of course, thought it was hilarious. The messier it got, the better the toy seemed to be. Gak was Nickelodeon's attempt to bottle their famous green slime, and for a while, it worked brilliantly. But many parents banned it from the house after one too many ruined rugs. Love it or hate it, Gak was a 1990s staple that proved mess and fun often went hand in hand. Gak Splat balls were every parent's nightmare disguised as a toy. They looked like harmless, goo-filled stress balls, squishy, sticky, and fun to throw at walls. The packaging promised they would splat, stick, and peel right off, ready to go again. And for the first few throws, they actually did. Then, reality set in. These things quickly picked up dirt, hair, and dust, turning them into gross lint bombs that smeared more than they stuck. Worse, they eventually exploded, either on impact or just from overuse. Suddenly, neon goo was dripping down your bedroom wall, staining the paint and seeping into the carpet. Parents groaned while kids laughed, treating every busted Gak Splat ball like a badge of honor. The sticky residue seemed impossible to clean, no matter how many times you scrubbed. Still, the memory of throwing one at the ceiling and watching it cling there until gravity finally peeled it off is burned into every 90s kid's brain. They were messy, gross, and short-lived, but unforgettable. The Mr. Bucket game was supposed to be wholesome fun, but it turned into pure chaos. This battery-powered toy waddled around spitting colorful balls out of its mouth while kids scrambled to scoop them back in. It was loud, unpredictable, and endlessly funny. The jingle from the commercial, "Put your balls in my mouth, Mr. Bucket," only made the toy more infamous, with parents shaking their heads while kids laughed uncontrollably. The frantic chase around the living room always ended with someone slipping, tripping, or getting smacked in the face by a flying ball. The toy's maniacal grin and constant spitting turned what should have been a simple game into a slapstick disaster. But the real catch? Mr. Bucket had terrible aim. Those plastic balls often shot straight into kids' faces, causing more tears than giggles. The balls rolled under furniture, across kitchens, and out the door before anyone could catch them. Parents hated the noise, kids loved the madness, and the whole thing felt like playing fetch with a drunk robot. Commercials made it look like family-friendly fun, but real-life gameplay was just kids diving across the floor while Mr. Bucket cackled and spat balls everywhere. For a toy designed to entertain, it had a special talent for causing absolute mayhem. Aquadots were the ultimate craft toy gone wrong. The beads came in dozens of bright colors, and kids used templates to create patterns on plastic boards. A spritz of water fused them together, leaving behind keychains, shapes, and art to proudly show off. The excitement came from watching those tiny beads magically harden into real creations. It felt like alchemy for kids. Parents praised them as a miracle toy because cleanup was easy and projects looked impressive without glue or glitter everywhere. For a while, they seemed like the perfect blend of fun and wholesome creativity. At first, parents thought they were genius, simple, creative, and less messy than paint or clay. But then the news broke. The chemical coating on Aquadots turned toxic inside the body, metabolizing into a substance similar to a date rape drug if swallowed. Suddenly, this harmless craft kit was making national headlines. Beads were recalled, lawsuits followed, and horrified parents swept them out of toy boxes forever. Still, kids remembered them as the magic beads that turned into danger overnight. Looking back, it is wild how something meant to encourage creativity ended up on the banned list. Kinder Surprise eggs were the forbidden fruit of the 1990s playground. Everywhere else in the world, kids happily cracked open chocolate eggs to find tiny buildable toys hidden inside. But in the United States, they were illegal, thanks to laws banning non-food items embedded in candy. That ban turned them into an object of myth, with kids whispering about the magical candy they could never legally have. Relatives coming back from overseas became heroes if they smuggled Kinder eggs in their luggage. Holding one felt like touching contraband candy gold. The logic was simple. Small plastic toys inside chocolate posed choking risks for kids. Of course, that only made American kids want them more. Travelers bragged about smuggling Kinder eggs from Europe or Canada, showing off the little capsules like treasure. The eggs combined two of the greatest childhood joys, candy and toys, into one irresistible package. For everyone outside the United States, they were a sweet staple of childhood. For American kids, they were legendary contraband. Jarts Jr. was supposed to be the kid-friendly fix for the deadly lawn dart craze. Instead of heavy metal tips, these came with blunt, rounded ends designed to bounce harmlessly off the grass. At least, that was the idea. Every neighborhood barbecue seemed to feature kids whipping jarts across the yard, dodging and shrieking as they flew overhead. Even though they were technically safer, they still hurt when one hit you square in the leg or forehead. The combination of excitement and risk gave them a dangerous thrill no safe toy could ever really remove. In practice, they still flew like miniature missiles, just slightly less lethal. Kids still managed to clock each other in the head, earning the toy another round of bans. Parents quickly realized that a sharp stick thrown by kids is dangerous, blunt or not. Yet, the thrill of hurling jarts across the yard was irresistible. For a few short years, Jarts Jr. was a summer staple of backyard games, equal parts fun and risky. Today, they stand as proof that sometimes safer is still not safe enough. Playground merry-go-rounds were both thrilling and terrifying. They were big metal discs bolted into the dirt with bars to hang on to. Kids would pile on while others ran alongside, spinning it faster and faster until it blurred. You could hear kids screaming in both laughter and panic, while the ones running always tried to prove who could make it spin the fastest. Sometimes kids would get flung off into the dirt, rolling across the playground like rag dolls while everyone else kept spinning. Bruises, bumps, and burns from the hot metal bars were just part of the deal, and nobody thought twice about it. Hanging on was a test of strength. Letting go was a guaranteed wipeout. Broken arms, scraped knees, and knocked out teeth were just part of the ride. Still, the rush of clinging to the bars while the world spun around you was addictive. Parents winced, teachers yelled, but kids begged for just one more spin. Eventually, liability fears led schools to rip them out of playgrounds. But ask anyone who grew up in the 90s and they will tell you, nothing compared to the dizzy thrill of a merry-go-round at full speed. Pokémon cards in school were less about fun and more about survival. Every kid had a binder full of prized cards, and every recess turned into a trading frenzy. Shiny holographic Charizards were currency, and playground deals could make or break friendships. The playground became a miniature stock exchange, with kids bargaining hard and guarding their cards like treasure. A bad trade could haunt you for weeks, and rumors of stolen cards spread like wildfire. The tension over one shiny card was enough to split entire friend groups. But as with any high-stakes economy, problems came fast. Arguments, fights, and even accusations of gambling erupted as kids tried to out-trade each other. Teachers got sick of breaking up battles over cards and started confiscating them by the stack. Still, Pokémon mania was unstoppable. Even when banned, kids found ways to smuggle their decks into school, trading in secret like black market dealers. The cards were more than just a game. They were bragging rights, social status, and a little piece of the 90s that drove schools crazy. Furbies in classrooms were the stuff of legend. At first, they were just strange, fuzzy creatures with glowing eyes and robotic voices. Kids loved them, squeezing and feeding them to hear their gibberish Furbish language. The problem was that Furbies never seemed to stay quiet. They would suddenly start talking in the middle of class, blurting out weird phrases at the worst possible times. Some swore their Furby remembered things it should not have, making the spying rumor even stronger. The blinking eyes and slow mechanical movements made it feel alive in a way that unsettled adults. But then rumors spread. Parents and teachers claimed Furbies could record conversations and repeat them back later. Suddenly, these toys were seen as spies in disguise. Some schools went so far as to ban them entirely, citing security concerns. The truth was less sinister. Furbies just learned new words randomly, but the creepy timing made the rumor stick. Between the eerie blinking and sudden bursts of speech, Furbies quickly went from cute companions to nightmare fuel. Bop It Extreme turned living rooms and classrooms into chaos zones. The game barked commands: bop it, twist it, pull it, flick it, spin it, and kids frantically tried to keep up. The faster it went, the louder and funnier the game became. Groups of kids would gather around, shouting along with the toy as if it were a team sport. Arguments broke out over who had the fastest reflexes, and someone always accused the toy of cheating when they lost. It was the kind of toy that turned quiet afternoons into noisy competitions instantly. But in classrooms? Disaster. The constant shouting and button mashing made it impossible to concentrate, driving teachers insane. Some schools outright banned it, declaring it too disruptive. Still, for kids, it was addictive. Part toy, part reflex test, part noise machine. Long after the batteries died, the commands lived rent-free in every 90s kid's head. Bop it! Twist it! Was more than a game. It was a cultural soundtrack of the decade. Laser pointer keychains were the prankster's best friend and every adult's nightmare. They were cheap, pocket-sized, and sold everywhere in the late 90s. Kids used them to shine red dots on walls, teachers, and even unsuspecting pets. At recess, whole groups of kids would chase the little glowing dot across the pavement, like it was the world's most important mission. Pets went wild for it too. Cats pounced, dogs barked, and kids laughed until their sides hurt. For a toy that cost only a couple of bucks, it offered endless chaos and entertainment. Classrooms turned into a battlefield of glowing red dots, with teachers constantly demanding to know who has that laser. Kids thought it was hilarious, but adults worried about eye damage. And for good reason. The pranks escalated quickly, from distracting teachers during lessons to aiming at moving cars. At first, it was harmless fun, chasing the dot like a game of tag. Then it escalated. Teachers complained about kids flashing them in the eyes, and worse, some kids aimed at cars and even airplanes. Suddenly, The harmless keychain became a banned object in schools and beyond. Still, every kid who had one remembers the mischievous thrill of sneaking a laser pointer into class. It was cheap, simple, and endlessly entertaining, right up until adults realized how dangerous it could be. Pogs and metal slammers were the currency of every 1990s playground, right up until schools decided they looked a little too much like gambling. The game started innocently enough. Kids stacked cardboard discs, Pogs, with colorful designs featuring everything from cartoons to wild patterns. Then came the slammer, a heavy metal or plastic disc used to flip the stack. Every playground had a kid who brought a massive case of Pogs, bragging about rare holographic or limited edition ones. The sound of a slammer smacking the stack was like a drumbeat that drew a crowd instantly. For a few minutes, the playground turned into a mini Las Vegas with cheers, groans, and sometimes tears. Whoever knocked the most Pogs face up got to keep them. Suddenly, kids were losing entire collections at recess. That is where the problem started. What was marketed as a harmless game turned into a daily hustle, with winners walking away loaded and losers in tears. Teachers quickly realized they had a miniature casino operating under the monkey bars. Fights broke out, trades went bad, and accusations of cheating became part of every recess. But the thrill of it was undeniable. Kids lugged around binders and cases filled with hundreds of Pogs, bragging about their rare ones like treasure hunters. The metal slammers, often oversized and sharp-edged, added an extra layer of danger. More than one kid had a bruised hand from an overzealous slam. Eventually, principals cracked down, banning Pogs from schools altogether. Looking back, it was part skill, part luck, and all chaos. But that is exactly why it was so fun. Bubble tape gum was marketed with the genius slogan, 6 feet of bubble gum. For you, not them. It came in a colorful plastic dispenser that looked like a mini tape measure. Crack it open, pull out a strip, and tear off however much you wanted. The coolest kids would bite straight from the roll, chomping down a foot of gum in one go just to show off. The flavor was intense at first, but disappeared within minutes, leaving you with a massive, jaw-breaking wad. The dispenser itself became a toy, too, clicked open and shut endlessly, even when the gum was long gone. The ads made it look rebellious, like kids finally had a gum made just for them. But in practice, it caused nothing but trouble in classrooms. Kids pulled out entire feet of gum at once, stuffing it in their mouths until they could barely chew, then leaving sticky wads under desks, in lockers, or worse, stuck to hair. Teachers hated it, janitors despised it, and parents groaned every time they found gum smeared into carpet. Yet, every kid begged for bubble tape. It felt different from boring sticks of gum, more like a personal stash of candy you controlled. Sharing was tricky too. Some kids were generous with strips, others guarded their tape like gold, leading to plenty of playground arguments. Bubble tape was delicious, it was fun, and it was banned in more classrooms than you could count. Still, that little plastic case remains one of the most iconic candy packages of the 1990s. Candy cigars were one of the strangest products ever sold to kids. Imagine this, a sweet pink or brown stick of bubblegum or chocolate, wrapped in cellophane, designed to look exactly like a real cigar. They were marketed as fun, grown-up treats for celebrations, birthday parties, new baby arrivals, or just pretending to be an adult. Some even came in fancy little boxes, mimicking the look of luxury cigars in every detail. Kids strutted around pretending to puff smoke, feeling like mob bosses or movie stars. The fact that they actually encouraged kids to role-play smoking is something that feels unbelievable today. In the 90s, nobody thought twice about it. Kids strutted around with candy cigars in their mouths, pretending to puff smoke like cartoon mob bosses. Looking back, it is wild that candy meant for children was openly encouraging them to imitate smoking. Some even came with powdered sugar inside, so when you blew on them, a little puff of white smoke came out. Parents eventually started to complain, and health advocates pushed to get them banned. Schools were especially strict. No candy cigars allowed, since the image alone was enough to raise eyebrows. By the late 90s, they faded from shelves in most places, but the memory remains unforgettable. For the kids who grew up with them, Candy cigars felt cheeky, silly, and rebellious, like holding a piece of forbidden adulthood in your hand. Today, they are a reminder of just how different the 1990s sense of humor really was. Butterfly knives and switchblade combs were the ultimate bad kid accessories of the 1990s. You could buy them at toy stores, novelty shops, or carnivals for just a couple of dollars. They looked like dangerous weapons, but instead of a blade, they popped open into either a plastic comb or just a blunt toy edge. The fun was all in the flourish. You flicked your wrist, snapped it open, and looked like the coolest person on the block. But of course, problems followed fast. Schools hated them, banning them almost instantly because kids kept whipping them out in the hallways, scaring teachers, and pretending to be street fighters. On the playground, it was all about who could flip theirs the fastest without dropping it. Some kids tried to modify theirs into something sharper, which only fueled the crackdown. For parents, they were annoying trinkets. For kids, they were symbols of attitude. Even though they were silly, they carried a rebellious edge, the kind of thing that made you feel tough without actually being tough. They are long gone from toy aisles now, but every 90s kid remembers that satisfying snap of a switchblade comb clicking into place. Skip It with Counter was one of the most deceptively painful toys of the decade. It was a simple plastic ring you looped around your ankle, with a weighted ball attached to a cord. You spun it in circles by swinging your leg, jumping over it as it passed. The built-in counter clicked with each rotation, tracking your skips. It was fun, competitive, and addictive, until it hit your shin. Every kid who played with a Skip It remembers that sharp smack of plastic slamming into bone, leaving bruises or worse, a sprain. Kids would compete to see who could rack up the highest number, often tripping and crashing hard in the process. Driveways, sidewalks, and gym floors all became arenas for Skip It showdowns. Parents hated the thudding noise, teachers banned them from recess because of too many accidents. Yet, despite the pain, kids kept coming back for more. The counter gave it just enough of a video game vibe to feel like progress, and beating your friend's score was irresistible. Skip It was goofy, frustrating, painful, and one of the most unforgettable banned toys of the 1990s. Wuzzles were one of the strangest and funniest ideas to come out of the 1980s plush craze. Each one was a hybrid animal mashup, like a lion mixed with a bumblebee, or a hippo combined with a rabbit. They were brightly colored, fuzzy, and completely ridiculous, but that was the charm. Kids spent hours giggling over the combinations, trying to imagine what real-life versions would look like if they somehow existed. Some even tried to invent their own Wuzzles by mixing up animals on paper, proving the toys sparked creativity as much as play. The cartoon series gave them distinct personalities, which only made kids want to collect every single one. Every Wuzzle had a pun-filled name to match its mixed-up design, and kids collected them to see just how wild the combinations could get. They came with a cartoon series that made them even more popular, showing the strange creatures living in their equally strange world. Parents might have rolled their eyes at yet another plush animal line, but kids adored the silliness. A Wuzzle felt like owning something unique, a stuffed animal that stood out from the rest of the pack. Looking back, they were absurd, but absurd in the best possible way. The Easy Bake Oven was not a toy. It was a rite of passage, a small, pastel-colored appliance that turned powdered mix into warm, edible cake using nothing but a light bulb. And somehow, that tiny miracle made you feel like a real chef. It was introduced earlier, but by the 1970s, every kid wanted one. Boys, girls, it did not matter. The Easy Bake Oven was your ticket to independence. You measured, you mixed, you waited. That soft hum of the bulb heating up your mini metal pan was suspense in its purest form. Would it bake right? Would it burn? Would Mom let you make another? The cakes were not good. They were dry, crumbly, and oddly sweet. But no one cared, because they were yours. You did not help Mom. You did not watch someone else. You baked it. That mattered. It was messy. It was thrilling. It was a small slice of adulthood you could claim all for yourself. And every time you opened that tiny oven door and pulled out a crooked, half-baked cupcake, you were not just making dessert. You were making memories. You were learning to take pride in the process, even when the result was barely edible. The canoe rental shack by the creek was not a business so much as a suggestion. A crooked sign, 3 boats tied to a tree, and a man named Gary who might have been there since 1948. Dad would slap a 20 into Gary's hand and say, "We'll be back in a couple hours," like it was no big deal. No forms, no helmets, no waiver. Just a paddle, a life vest that definitely had not been certified since Eisenhower, and you, wobbling into a canoe while Dad shoved you off the bank with 1 foot. Once you got going, though, it was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you realize just how loud life usually is. Birds overhead, water slapping against the side, and Dad telling the same story about how he once saw a snapping turtle the size of a garbage can. You never saw one, but you wanted to. You learned how to steer, sort of, and how to duck when you went under a low branch too late. You got soaked, you laughed, and when you finally dragged the canoe back onto dry land, Dad would clap you on the shoulder like you had just completed Navy SEAL training. But if that creek showed you the earth, the next place aimed a little higher, right up into the stars. Television Guide was the original streaming schedule, printed, folded, and worshipped. Each week, families flipped through its pages to plan their entire viewing life. What time is your show on? What channel is the big movie airing? Without a television guide, you were lost in the static. It listed every program, from early morning cartoons to late-night reruns. You circled shows in pen. You memorized time slots. You argued with siblings over what to watch and when. Sometimes you even set a timer on the VCR to record your favorites, if you could figure out how. Television Guide came with featured articles, behind-the-scenes trivia, and occasionally a glossy cover that made you feel like you were holding something special. It was not just a magazine, it was a map, a lifeline, and a reminder that missing your show meant waiting until summer reruns or, gasp, never seeing it again. Kids today will never understand the pressure of being ready at exactly 7 o'clock, or the heartbreak of flipping the page and realizing your favorite show was preempted by a holiday parade. The television guide was small, simple, and essential, and in a world before scrolling, it helped us find our way through the glow of the living room screen. The Viewmaster was not just a toy, it was a portal. You held it up to your face like binoculars, clicked the lever, and entered a new world, one tiny slide at a time. These were not just pictures. They were 3D windows into places you had never been and shows you loved. Suddenly, Bugs Bunny was popping out at you. You were walking through Disneyland or swimming under the sea. The images were bright, bold, and vivid, especially when the sunlight hit just right. The reels came in paper packets, labeled like treasure maps, each one promising a new adventure, and you kept them all, in shoe boxes, in drawers, maybe scattered across the floor until your mom made you pick them up. The Viewmaster made you feel like a traveler, even if you never left your room. It was quiet entertainment. No batteries, no wires, no screens. Just your imagination and a satisfying click with every slide. The joy was in the anticipation. What will the next picture be? Where will I go next? You could spend hours lost in it. You remember how your arms got tired, but you kept clicking. One more reel. One more journey. Because for those few minutes, the world was just you and the magic inside that plastic viewer. Tangy Taffy was the candy you had to work for, and that was half the fun. Long before it became part of the Laffy Taffy brand, this chewy strip came in a thin plastic wrapper and offered a sweet, stretchy challenge for any sugar-loving kid in the 1960s. It came in vibrant colors and punchy flavors like grape, strawberry, and sour apple, each one delivering a jolt of sugar and just the right amount of tartness. You could bend it, stretch it, or roll it into a ball before finally taking a bite. The longer you chewed, the stronger the flavor got, which made it perfect for kids trying to make a nickel's worth of candy last the whole afternoon. Sometimes it stuck to your teeth. Sometimes it stuck to the wrapper. But it was always worth it. Tangy Taffy was less about elegance and more about fun, bright, bold, and unapologetically sweet. For many kids, it was the ultimate playground treat, swapped on school buses or bought from corner stores with pocket change. Today's candies may be smoother or flashier, but they cannot match the simple satisfaction of a taffy you could stretch, fold, and chew until your jaw hurt. Musclemen, officially called MUSCLE, were tiny pink wrestling figurines that managed to be both bizarre and irresistible. Standing barely 2 inches tall, they came in packs filled with dozens of strange-looking characters. Some had bulging muscles and masks, while others looked like aliens, robots, or monsters that had wandered into a wrestling ring. Kids often invented entire tournaments, pitting their weirdest figures against each other in pretend championship battles. They argued fiercely about which figures were the rarest, often trading them on the playground like prized treasures. Parents might not have understood their appeal, but for kids, these strange little wrestlers represented an entire universe of imagination. Kids would line them up, slam them together, and declare epic battles even though the figures were stiff as statues. There were hundreds of them to collect, and half the fun was not knowing which oddball design you would pull from a pack. Parents looked at them and saw cheap lumps of rubber, but kids saw a sprawling league of fighters with endless potential. The name promised muscle, but in reality, these toys were more about absurdity than toughness. They were weird, fun, and collectible. Exactly the formula for playground popularity in the 1980s. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was not flashy. It had no lasers, no puppets doing pratfalls, no catchy jingles, but it had something better: genuine warmth. Fred Rogers, with his cardigan sweater and calm voice, welcomed every child as if they were the most important person in the world. And to many, he was the only adult who ever did. Debuting in 1968 but shaping hearts well into the 1970s, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was slow, simple, and radical in its kindness. It was not a show you watched for action. It was a show you watched to feel safe. Fred Rogers talked about emotions, anger, sadness, fear, and he did it without blinking. He told you it was okay to feel, that you were not alone, that being a child was hard, and that your feelings mattered. There was no pressure to be funny or smart or fast. You just had to be yourself. That was enough. The land of make-believe added whimsy, but it was always grounded in care. Mr. Rogers did not perform for you. He spoke to you, and that made all the difference. For many kids, his neighborhood was not just a television set, it was a sanctuary. A quiet reminder that love could be gentle, and that you were loved just by being you. The dairy farm drive-thru felt like something out of a storybook. You did not get out of the car. You just rolled forward slowly on a gravel path that crunched under the tires like popcorn, while the smell of hay and cream filled the air. Wooden signs pointed the way. Milk, cream, eggs, and sometimes fresh butter today. Dad would pull up to the window, nod at the farmhand, and exchange a couple of glass bottles like they were precious cargo. You could hear them clinking together softly in the metal crate behind the seat, already cold with condensation. If you had been on your best behavior, meaning no backseat bickering and no complaints during the wait, he would ask the real question, "You want a cone?" It was always a yes. The scoop was big, the cone was soggy by the time you were halfway through, and somehow it still tasted like heaven. Sometimes Dad would get one too and say, "Best $2 I ever spent." And as the cows in the distance mooed lazily and the sun painted gold across the field, you realized simple things could feel grand. But if you think that was charming, just wait until you step inside the used bookstore that sold both dusty novels and ham radios whispering from across the country. If you remember clacker toys, you probably also remember getting smacked in the face. These were two solid acrylic balls connected by a string, meant to be swung up and down until they clacked together above and below your hand. That was the whole toy. No batteries, no screen. Just two hard spheres ready to leave a bruise. And kids loved them. The louder and faster they clacked, the cooler you were. It was a skill to master. Get the rhythm right, and you could keep them going for minutes. Get it wrong, and you got a nasty surprise. Parents hated them. Teachers banned them. Hospitals probably kept a few on hand just to demonstrate what not to do. They were loud, dangerous and oddly satisfying. For a few wild years, clackers were everywhere, on sidewalks, in classrooms, and hidden under beds when they got taken away. Eventually, safety concerns shut them down, but not before a generation got their fill of noise and near misses. They were outlawed in some places, but that only made them cooler. If you ever got them moving just right, you remember the thrill, and maybe a headache to go with it. They were chaos in toy form, and we would not have had it any other way. Miniskirts arrived like a fashion revolution. Short, sharp, and bold, they sliced through the conservative silhouettes of the 1950s and became the defining garment of the 1960s youth movement. Popularized by designers like Mary Quant and embraced by British mod culture, the miniskirt represented freedom, rebellion, and a new kind of confidence. It was daring but playful, feminine but fierce. Hemlines rose, attitudes shifted, and suddenly women were claiming space on the streets, on the dance floor, and in the workplace. The skirt barely reached mid-thigh, often paired with bold patterns, bright colors, or textured fabrics like corduroy and vinyl. Worn with turtlenecks or boxy jackets, it was as much about contrast as it was about comfort. Women weren't just dressing up, they were dressing out, outward, loudly, visibly. Some schools banned them. Some parents frowned, but the miniskirt kept rising in popularity and in cut. It became a uniform of sorts for women carving out new identities in a changing world. They were photographed on street corners, in protest marches, at record stores, and in the pages of glossy magazines. Photos from the time show crowds of young people in knee socks and miniskirts, smiling wide, striding forward. It was not just fashion. It was a statement, and for those who lived it, it is still stitched into the fabric of memory, one daring hem at a time. Popples were the plush toys that pulled off a magic trick. At first, they looked like colorful teddy bears with round ears, big eyes, and cheerful grins. But then you flipped them inside out, and they folded neatly into little fuzzy balls. The pop, back into their original form, was the real thrill. Kids loved watching their cuddly toy transform and then showing off the trick to friends. Each Popple had its own bright color scheme and personality, making them collectible as well as fun. They were soft enough to sleep with, but playful enough to serve as entertainment during playdates. Commercials showed Popples bouncing around like living creatures, and for kids, that seemed perfectly believable. They combined the appeal of a stuffed animal with the surprise of a gimmick, making them one of the more memorable plush toys of the decade. Popples may look odd now, but in their time, they were pure toy magic. The Nerf ball was not just a toy, it was permission. Permission to throw, jump, chase, and tackle indoors without worrying about broken windows or bruised siblings. When it launched in 1969, it quietly revolutionized playtime in the 1970s. This soft, squishy ball, usually bright orange or yellow, was more than foam. It was freedom. For kids stuck indoors during rainy days or cold winters, the Nerf ball turned living rooms into stadiums. It was tossed down hallways, bounced off walls, smacked off ceilings, and it never hurt anyone. That was its genius. It let kids be rowdy without consequences. No one had to yell, "Not in the house," anymore. Suddenly, tag became dodgeball. A lazy Sunday became a full-blown game of catch, and for many kids, it was the first time a ball felt safe. It was something even little siblings could join in on. Parents accepted it, teachers tolerated it, kids lived for it. The Nerf ball was not flashy. It did not talk or light up. But it had this perfect bounce, this perfect softness, and it never failed to make playtime better. In a world full of do not touch, Nerf was the one thing kids were always allowed to grab and throw as hard as they could. The small-town airport was barely an airport at all. A cracked runway, 2 hangars, and a chain-link fence with holes big enough to stick your face through. But Dad? He treated it like Kennedy Space Center. He would park the car at the edge of the lot, pop the hood up just enough for shade, and sit with a root beer balanced on the hood like he was waiting for clearance to launch. You joined him, legs swinging off the bumper, eyes on the horizon. Cessnas came and went, some buzzing overhead like dragonflies, others taxiing so slow it felt like they were afraid to leave the ground. "That one's a Skyhawk," Dad would say, as if naming a friend. "Twin engine, listen to the pitch." You nodded, pretending to hear the difference. Every now and then someone would land rough, and Dad would let out a low whistle. Bet he felt that one. The sun dipped lower. The planes grew fewer. But the quiet stuck with you, the feeling that for a few minutes the sky belonged to you. And when Dad said, "Let's stop by the photo shop on the way home," you knew the magic was about to get printed. Backyard fun in the 1970s was loud, chaotic, and often a little dangerous. Enter the water wiggle. It looked innocent enough. A smiling plastic head connected to a long hose. But the moment the water was turned on, it became a wild, whipping, serpentine menace. It sprayed water in every direction and flailed unpredictably, turning the yard into a circus of screams and soaked clothes. Kids chased it. It chased them back. You never knew where it would go. One second it was dancing in the air. The next it was smacking you in the shins. It had one job: to create watery mayhem, and it was great at it. Parents watched from porches, laughing or nervously sipping iced tea. Some turned the pressure down, others cranked it up. Either way, you ended up drenched. There were no safety labels or slow modes, just you, the hose, and the wiggling chaos that could knock over toddlers and send dogs running. It was thrilling, it was unpredictable, and it was absolutely beloved. They do not make toys like that anymore, probably for good reason. But those summer afternoons when laughter mixed with shrieks and the sprinkler twisted through the air like a possessed noodle, those are hard to forget. Operation was not just a game, it was a test of nerves. Released by Milton Bradley in 1965, this battery-operated board game turned you into a surgeon, operating on a cartoonish patient named Cavity Sam. He lay there in his hospital gown, wide-eyed and helpless, with little cavities holding ailments like a funny bone, a wishbone, or a Charlie horse. The goal? Use tweezers to remove each piece without touching the metal edges of the cavity. If you slipped even slightly, the board buzzed loudly and Sam's red nose lit up. That buzz? It haunted dreams. Kids would wince, laugh, and shout all at once. The challenge was as much about steady hands as it was about keeping calm under pressure. Operation was competitive, silly, and oddly tense. You might remember tilting the board to cheat or holding your breath during a particularly tricky extraction. It was often pulled out during family game night, and even adults found themselves sweating over the tiny butterfly in the stomach. Operation was more than a toy. It was an experience, a rite of passage. And the first time many kids learned that success sometimes comes down to keeping a steady hand. Pound puppies were the ultimate adoptable stuffed animal of the 1980s. These plush dogs had droopy ears, sad eyes, and a soft, huggable body that made you want to rescue them immediately. They came in little cardboard doghouse packages, complete with adoption certificates, so kids felt like they were really giving a home to a lonely pup. Opening the box felt like meeting a real pet for the first time, with kids carefully signing their names on the certificate as if they had just gone through an adoption process. Many children gave their pound puppies elaborate backstories, treating them like real family members who needed love and attention. Parents often found entire kennels of them lined up on beds, each one tucked in under a blanket. Each one had a unique look, different colors, spots, or floppy ears, so kids collected them like a real shelter of stuffed animals. The marketing leaned heavily on guilt. How could you leave such a sad puppy behind? Kids begged their parents for one, promising they would take care of it, even though the only care required was cuddling. They became a massive hit, spawning cartoons, accessories, and endless lines of new puppies. Pound puppies tapped into a kid's natural instinct to nurture, while also being ridiculously cute and soft. They were more than toys. They were companions, straight out of the pound and into your bed. No child in the 1970s felt cooler than when riding a big wheel. With its huge front wheel, low-riding plastic seat, and bright colors, it looked like a race car designed by a kid, because it basically was. Once you hopped on and pushed those plastic pedals, you were not just moving, you were flying. Sidewalks became speedways, driveways became danger zones, and every slope was a dare. The sound of the wheels grinding on concrete was a soundtrack of summer. Every kid knew how to drift, how to slam the brake and spin out in a glorious slide that made you feel like a stuntman. Scraped knees were badges of honor. Big wheels were not built to last, but that only made you ride harder. They cracked, they faded. But while they worked, they were unstoppable. Parents loved them because they were safe. Kids loved them because they felt anything but. Riding a big wheel gave you that first taste of rebellion. You could go fast, steer wild, and race your friends with nothing between you and the road but a thin piece of plastic. It was freedom on 3 wheels, and for many 1970s kids, it was their first vehicle and their first addiction to speed. The Firehouse pancake breakfast was not just a fundraiser, it was a local holiday. Dad would wake you up early on a Sunday, say, "Put on your shoes." And before you could ask questions, you were in line behind a dozen people all craving the same thing, a plate piled high with pancakes. The folding chairs wobbled, the long tables had little dents and permanent syrup rings, and everything smelled like melted butter and maple sugar. Real maple syrup was a luxury, so they used the bottled kind, the kind that came out slow and stuck the lid shut like glue. Firefighters in aprons manned the griddles, flipping pancakes like they had trained for it. Dad would nod in approval, pile his plate, and crack a joke to someone in line about how this was the real breakfast of champions. Dad never won, but he always bought 5 tickets just in case. It was not about the pancakes, really. It was about community, about showing up. And when breakfast was over, he would say, "Let's make a stop on the way back." That stop? Usually a roadside museum with one very questionable claim to fame. Suddenly turned red, white, and blue. The United States Bicentennial was not just a celebration, it was a full-on marketing explosion. You could not walk through a store without seeing patriotic plates, mugs, coins, or even shampoo bottles branded with stars and stripes. It was not just about pride, it was about collecting. From quarters stamped with a drummer boy to commemorative soda cans and decorative tins, Americans scooped up anything that screamed 1776 to 1976. Kids got coloring books with bald eagles. Adults hung commemorative plates on the wall and bought matching sets of Liberty Bell glasses from the gas station. You might remember paperweights, lunchboxes, and even cereal boxes that joined in. For one shining year, everything in your house looked like it belonged to George Washington's birthday party. And while some saw it as kitschy or overdone, others cherished these pieces. They were physical reminders of a once-in-a-lifetime celebration. Even today, if you find one buried in a drawer or tucked in a box, it hits differently. Not just patriotic, but personal. Because in that moment, the whole country was decorating its memory, and every family had at least one artifact to prove they were part of it. Record players were more than machines. They were furniture, ritual, and mood setters all in one. In the 1960s, every home had one, whether it stood alone on a tabletop or was built into a cabinet the size of a small sofa. You lifted the lid, selected a vinyl record, and gently placed it on the turntable. Then came the careful lowering of the needle, a tiny, deliberate act that brought a whole room to life. The crackle before the music started was half the experience. Whether it was the Beatles, Patsy Cline, or the Four Tops, the sound filled the air in a way no radio could match. You listened to full albums, start to finish. You memorized the order of songs. You stared at the cover art like it held secrets. Records were delicate, and so was the act of playing them. Dust had to be brushed off. Needles had to be replaced. Some turntables had automatic arms, others had to be nudged by hand. Either way, it felt like ceremony. The music had weight, not just in sound, but in the effort it took to hear it. Families gathered for listening nights. Teenagers escaped into headphones. A stack of records leaning against the wall told you everything about someone. And even when the music skipped, it felt like part of the charm. That moment when the room fell still, waiting for the needle to find its groove again. It was quiet, real, and unforgettable. Today, vinyl has made a comeback, but for those who grew up spinning hits in the 1960s, it never really left. Garbage pail. Kids' figures took the gross-out trend to the next level. The trading cards were already infamous. Parodies of Cabbage Patch Kids with disgusting names and even grosser illustrations. Turning them into actual little plastic figures was both inevitable and shocking. These toys were small, about the size of action figures, but packed with details like oozing slime, dripping noses, bulging stomachs, and exaggerated features that made parents cringe. Kids, on the other hand, could not get enough. The thrill was in how wrong they felt, collecting dolls that were the complete opposite of the sweet, innocent Cabbage Patch Kids everyone else had. Names like Atom Bomb and Leaky Lindsay made kids giggle and made teachers roll their eyes when they turned up in classrooms. Parents might have hated them, but that only made them cooler. They were rebellion wrapped in plastic, proof that the 1980s toy world was not afraid to get messy, weird, and a little shocking. For kids, Garbage Pail Kids figures were treasures to be swapped, displayed, and laughed at endlessly. If you laughed, winced, or remembered one of these banned 90s treasures, drop your funniest memory in the comments, hit the like button if you survived them, and subscribe so we can keep digging up the wild side of childhood together.